right, well, thank you for being here, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to come by and say hello to you guys. My name is Kristen. I met Bacco and was a part of LAZD a little over a decade ago, I guess it was, that we connected. A number of years ago, Bacco took me to South Sudan and got to experience some of those cultural differences and activities that we went through supporting the communities in South Sudan. He had asked me to speak today, and he wanted me to talk about communities and building capacity, and just building some capacity to deal with racism and anti-racism here in our communities in Canada. So, Edmonton, May 27th, LAZD had a conference up in Edmonton, and one of the speakers started off with a quote from Nelson Mandela, and I wanted to start off with that very same quote. No one is born hating another person because of their skin or because of his background or because of his religion. People must learn to hate. And if they can learn to hate, they can be taught to love. For love comes more naturally to the human heart than its opposite. So I'm going to ask a question. What are your biases? What do you have a tendency to default to in your thinking? What are my biases? How do I see the world? What perspective, what lens am I looking at the world? What lens are you using to look at the world? So I'm going to start with a question of who I am. Hi, my name is Kristen. I happen to be a human. Are you a human? Yes? We have something in common. At least that's a good place to start with. And that very simple question, that something in common, is a good way to start breaking down and changing our lens of how we see things to start breaking apart those biases. Now, I'm a safety professional, and so when I see things through the lens of risk mitigation. I've been volunteering at St. John Ambulance for a lot of years, so I'm really good with my first aid. And I go into communities to support safety programs through child safety seats. So if somebody has children, infants, newborns, short teenagers, people that need to have booster seats, child seats, rear-facing, front-facing, I'm the guy that comes in and can do an assessment and make sure those seats are safely installed, and that the kids are safely in the seat as well. So safety, that's just how I think about life and how I do things. I like to think critically about things, and I like to embrace difficult conversations. And difficult conversations means that we have to take time to stop, to pause, to genuinely listen to the other person, to have that difficult conversation, to see what space they're holding, what point of reference that they're coming from, to see what their biases are, to examine my own biases, to see if in that difficult conversation, am I in the wrong? Am I thinking correctly? Am I thinking wrongly? I know that the past is the past. We cannot change the past. And the past is how we got to where we are today. And so we need to look at that past and remember it so that we can understand the path that we got to today and use that as a tool to transform our today into a better future and a better tomorrow. And we do that through our communities, through the people that we interact with, the people that we trust, the people that we have relationships with. And when we look at racism, when we look at what's going on, it's us versus them. It's you're different than me, therefore. It's how do we lift ourselves out of that? Fear, ignorance, greed, scarcity. We want to make a difference. We want to get out of the cycle. But when it comes to racism, that form of discrimination, I always go back to thinking about when I was a child and I had a fish tank. And I would watch the fish in that tank. And if I introduced a wrong fish into the tank, the fish would start acting differently with each other. They would stop schooling, they would start isolating themselves, just in the fish tank with a different fish. some fish just really don't like each other. A good example is goldfish. If you have a school of fish that are happy together and you introduce a goldfish into that tank, the goldfish will want to be the boss of everybody. And it will find a fish that's weak. And then it will start nipping the fins of that fish. And then it'll bully the other fish until the other fish start nipping the fins of that fish. And eventually, all those fish in that school start nipping the fins of that fish until that fish can no longer swim. And after that fish can no longer swim, that fish dies. And then that goldfish will choose a different fish to pick on and nip the fins of and bully. And then that cycle continues. And then more fish in that school are going to end up dying until you have too few fish and the fish can no longer school together and they scatter and isolate. So what's the solution for that in that fish tank? You build a better community in that tank. You put resources in that tank, trees, woods, logs, rocks, places for fish to swim, to hide, to feel safe in, to get cover in, to be able to get access to food when you feed them, so that those fish have enough space to be able to remove their stress in that situation that they're in, because they can't leave that tank. So when the situation changes, they have to have that capacity in that tank for them as a fish to survive as a community. My experiences in Canada, I feel very blessed. But my experiences in my past, the biases that I've had, many of those biases I've had to unlearn. I had a grandmother who was highly prejudiced. I didn't know that I had learned from her just by being with her. As a kid, I grew up in Winnipeg, and so I would be part of all these different cultures and groups and environments, and so I'm not racist. I accept everybody at face value, that's all good. But I learned from my past, and I didn't know I had learned from my past until I was able to be confronted by it through difficult conversations. Now, I've worked in security at the Calgary airport even, and it's amazing to see how people interact in environments where it's a bad situation, bad things are happening, stress is high. Back to that fish tank again, except we're dealing with humans, not fish. We're dealing in a building, a cold infrastructure, or an organization, a workplace. How do you succeed there? You build capacity. You build capacity so that the things are in place where some people have a safe place to go to, where they can sound off and have conversations with each other and be respected in a way that allows them to have a voice. Those are the strategies that we used to be able to allow people to speak and to have common ground. I'm a human, are you a human? We have something in common. So for me, where I came from, that's my bias. Why are you here? Where did you come from? What is your bias? I know some people here, my wife, she's Ukrainian. Very recently, last year, she got her Canadian citizenship. She's having to deal with racism. Another country invaded Ukraine because greed, because power, control, desire. And then that country turns around and says, we're going to rewrite the history books. We're going to rewrite the school books. You never existed as a society. We hate you so much. We need to wipe you out. We don't want you to exist. It's a choice to look at things differently. It's a choice to say, hey, I'm a human too. Are you a human? Let's start there. We have commonalities. We have things in common. Me, I love good food. And today, thank you so much. That was a really beautiful lunch. My wife, she loves cooking a Mediterranean, Greek-style diet. I'm very conservative, the meat and potatoes kind of a guy, so getting in, trying new spices and flavors is, oh, that's just so much fun, good food. Much appreciated, thank you so much. But we do have differences, and we do acknowledge those differences, because that gives us context, and context gives us understanding. Stephen R. Covey, seek first to understand, then to be understood. This requires empathy, it requires grace, it requires patience, and capacity to listen. Capacity to be patient, capacity to be gracious to see another person and to hold them up and to give them that value and that space where they can express themselves. So there's many reasons why you're here today, that you have come into Alberta, into Canada, grew up, born here, immigrated here. There's many reasons why I've gone into Ukraine, following my wife there, adding value to friends, community. So that's a part of our background, that's a part of the story, that's a part of the history. It describes where we've been. It gives us reason to how we ended up here today. And it's a part of the story that we need for tomorrow. So that as we move forward, we're using that as a framework to build the capacity in our community so that we can have better conversations and so that we can find more gaps, more bridges to build, more opportunities to build capacity. I would say that that bridge building and that capacity building part of who we are as a community is about not isolating. Yes, we need to find a safe space that if somebody wants to go and have a quiet time by themselves, if that fish in that fish tank needs to go hide under a rock or find a cooler place in the leaves of one of the plants in that tank, absolutely, we as humans, we need the same thing. Some place to go and have some alone time. But not to isolate, not to build silos. We're this, we're defined in this silo. We're this, we're defined in this silo. We're over here in this silo. No, that's not going to work. We need to share our resources. We need to share our stories. We need to build a communication toolbox. Back to security again. Everything that I learned about security wasn't about keeping this building safe with nobody entering the building. It was about building communication tools to have conversations. That was the most important lesson that I ever learned about security, was about communication and having conversations and having a safe place where people could have those conversations and to understand. That openness, that patience, to destroy racism and to build better communities, we have to have that patience. We need to understand our own biases and our own histories so that we can model what we want our future to be so others can see that model. So that we can rise above that discrimination. We can deal with calling out those that are picking the fins off of people and say, hey, that's just not quite right, that's not going to work here. We're going to model that differently. And building capacity is important. As a safety professional, my goal is to make sure that people don't get injured, people don't get hurt, that we don't have incidents on the work site. But we're always going to have some incident that happens. We can't bring this to no accidents. That'll never happen. But we can build capacity so that when something does happen, we can fail safely. And if we can fail safely and talk about it and have those open conversations and have a point of community and commonality, then we can deal with that and build that capacity in the community. That's, I think, where we need to be. So thank you for having me on this thought and this mind. if there are questions that people would like to have to challenge me on that, I'm open and very welcome to having a difficult conversation. Thank you.